The bitter taste of betrayal clung to Abigail Montgomery's throat as she watched her husband ride away from their homestead. The blonde-haired banker's daughter clinging to his waist, their silhouettes disappearing into the golden haze of the Montana sunset in the spring of 1876. She had given Thomas 5 years of her life, only to be discarded like yesterday's coffee grounds when Penelope Watson batted her eyelashes his way. Abigail stood on the porch of the small cabin they had built together, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden railing. The ranch they had struggled to establish sat half-finished around her, a cruel reminder of broken promises. At 23, she was now alone in a world that offered little mercy to a woman without a husband, especially 50 miles from the nearest town of Clearwater. "Damn you, Thomas," she whispered, her voice carried away by the prairie wind. Pride kept her tears at bay, though her heart felt hollowed out. She had 1 milk cow, 6 chickens, a stubborn mule, and enough supplies to last a month if she was careful. Thomas had taken their only horse and most of their savings, leaving her with merely a terse note explaining he needed more than this life could give. As dusk settled, Abigail moved mechanically through her evening chores. The cow needed milking, the chickens required feeding, and the vegetable garden wouldn't tend itself. Her mind raced with practical concerns. She would need to chop wood, hunt for meat, and somehow keep the wolves, both animal and human, from her door. She slept fitfully that night, clutching Thomas's shotgun, startling at every creak and rustle outside. By morning, determination had replaced shock. Abigail Montgomery might have been abandoned, but she refused to be defeated. 3 days passed in a blur of exhausting work. Abigail repaired fencing, hauled water from the creek, and inventoried her meager supplies. On the 4th morning, as she struggled to split logs for firewood, the axe nearly slipping from her blistered hands, she heard the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. Her heart leapt to her throat. Had Thomas returned? Had he realized his mistake? She quickly tamped down that traitorous hope. More likely, it was trouble approaching, perhaps bandits who'd heard of a woman alone. Abigail dropped the axe and hurried inside for the shotgun. When she returned to the porch, a lone rider was approaching at an unhurried pace. He sat tall in the saddle atop a magnificent buckskin horse, his broad shoulders and confident posture marking him as a man accustomed to the saddle. A black Stetson shaded his face. She raised the shotgun, aiming it squarely at the stranger's chest. "That's far enough," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The rider halted his horse about 20 paces from the house and raised his hands slowly. "Madam, I mean no harm." His voice was deep and calm, carrying a hint of a southern drawl. "State your business," Abigail demanded. "Name's Zachary Blackwood," he said, keeping his hands visible. "I've been tracking rustlers through these parts. Thought I might ask for some water for my horse." Abigail didn't lower the shotgun. "There's a creek half a mile east. Help yourself." The man Zachary nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He studied the homestead, his eyes taking in the half-built barn, the sagging fence, and finally Abigail herself. "Couldn't help but notice you're out here alone." "That's not common." "My situation is none of your concern, Mr. Blackwood." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, madam, it surely isn't." He lowered his hands gradually. "If you've no need of assistance, I'll be on my way." Something in his manner, respectful but not pitying, made Abigail hesitate. She needed help, loath as she was to admit it. The roof had begun leaking in the last rainfall, and there was no way she could repair it alone. "Wait," she called as he turned his horse. "Are you truly tracking rustlers?" He nodded. "I work for the Cattlemen's Association. There's been trouble with a gang taking stock across 3 counties. Abigail lowered the shotgun slightly. "Can you prove that?" Zachary reached slowly into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "My authorization from the association." "Signed by Judge Parker himself." She gestured for him to toss it over. When he did, she unfolded it with one hand, keeping the shotgun ready with the other. The document appeared legitimate, complete with an official seal. "I have some coffee on," she said finally. "And my cow gives more milk than I can use alone. You're welcome to both before you continue your search." Zachary dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. He was tall, taller than Thomas, with broad shoulders and a lean waist. As he removed his hat, She saw his face clearly for the first time. Dark hair, touched with silver at the temples despite his apparent youth, framed a weathered face with keen blue eyes. A scar ran along his jawline, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks. "I'd be obliged," he said, tying his horse to the hitching post. Abigail kept a careful distance as she led him to the house. Inside, she gestured to the small table while keeping the shotgun within reach as she poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "You have a name, madam?" he asked, sipping the strong brew. "Abigail Montgomery, Mrs. Montgomery," he acknowledged with a nod. "Your husband out hunting?" The question stung more than she expected. "Mr. Montgomery is no longer in residence," she said stiffly. "He departed several days ago." Understanding flickered in Zachary's eyes. "I see." He didn't offer empty consolations or prying questions, which Abigail appreciated. Instead, he glanced around the cabin. "Roof's leaking," he observed, noting the bucket placed strategically in the corner. "Among other things," Abigail admitted. Zachary finished his coffee in thoughtful silence. When he stood, Abigail tensed, but he merely placed his cup on the table. "I appreciate the hospitality, Mrs. Montgomery. I should continue my search before the trail grows colder." She nodded, surprised at her reluctance to see him leave. At the door, he paused. "Those rustlers I'm tracking, they've been known to target isolated homesteads. Might be wise to stay particularly vigilant until I've caught up to them." "I can handle myself," Abigail said, though the warning sent a chill through her. Zachary studied her for a moment. "I don't doubt that, madam. Still, would you object if I rode by again tomorrow, just to ensure all's well?" Pride warred with practicality in Abigail's mind. "I suppose that would be acceptable," she finally said. He nodded, replaced his hat, and stepped outside. Before mounting his horse, he looked back at the half-finished barn and the pile of logs Abigail had been attempting to split. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said carefully, "I've got about 2 hours of daylight left. If you've no objection, I could tend to that roof before I go." Abigail hesitated, torn between necessity and the impropriety of accepting help from a strange man. But the memory of water dripping onto her bed during the last rainfall decided her. "I would be grateful," she said at last. Zachary worked efficiently, locating the source of the leak and repairing it with materials from the barn. Abigail watched him from below, noting his sure movements and methodical approach. By the time he finished, the sun was low on the horizon. "That should hold," he said, climbing down from the roof, "at least until the next big storm." "Thank you," Abigail said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "What do I owe you?" Zachary shook his head. "Nothing at all, madam. My mother raised me to help when help's needed." He mounted his horse with a fluid motion. "I'll ride by tomorrow if that's still agreeable." Abigail nodded, surprising herself. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, that would be fine." As he rode away, Abigail found herself watching until he disappeared into the growing darkness. For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair and anger, a flicker of something almost like hope. True to his word, Zachary Blackwood returned the next day shortly after noon. Abigail spotted him approaching from the west as she was hanging laundry on the line. This time she didn't reach for the shotgun. "Mrs. Montgomery," he called, removing his hat as he approached. "All quiet?" "Yes, thankfully," she replied. "Any luck with your rustlers?" He dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Found signs of them heading north." "I'll pick up the trail again tomorrow." He glanced around the homestead. "That fence won't keep predators out for long." Abigail followed his gaze to the sagging rail fence. "I'm aware. It's on my list after chopping enough wood to last the week." Zachary studied her for a moment, noting her determined expression despite the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. "I've a few hours before I need to make camp. I could help with the fence if you'd provide another cup of that coffee." Part of Abigail wanted to refuse to prove she could manage alone, but practicality won out. "I'll put the pot on," she said. They worked side by side that afternoon, Zachary repairing the fence while Abigail split kindling for the evening fire. Their conversation was sparse but companionable, focusing on practical matters rather than personal ones. As evening approached, Zachary completed the fence repairs and helped Abigail carry water from the creek to fill her barrels. Before departing, he hesitated. "Mrs. Montgomery, how are you fixed for meat?" The question struck at Abigail's greatest worry. Thomas had taken their rifle, leaving her with only the shotgun serviceable for defense but not ideal for hunting. "I have some salt pork," she admitted, "but it won't last long." Zachary nodded thoughtfully. "If you've no objection, I could bring a deer tomorrow. These woods are plentiful." Abigail's pride warred with hunger. "I can pay you for your trouble," she offered. A small smile touched his lips. "No need, I'll be hunting for my own supper anyway. One more won't make much difference." After he left, Abigail found herself watching the trail long after he disappeared from view. There was something reassuring about Zachary Blackwood, a steadiness that reminded her of the mountains on the horizon, constant and reliable. The next day, Zachary arrived with a young buck draped across his horse. He helped Abigail dress and prepare the meat, showing her how to smoke portions to preserve them longer. They worked efficiently together, and Abigail found herself relaxing in his presence. "Where did you learn butchering?" she asked as they wrapped the last cuts in cloth. "My father was a rancher in Texas," Zachary replied. "Taught me everything about surviving in the wilderness before I was 12. "Is that where you're from, Texas?" he nodded. "Born in Dallas, left after the war." His expression clouded briefly, and Abigail didn't press for details. Instead, she asked, "How long have you worked for the Cattlemen's Association?" 3 years now," he said, washing blood from his hands in a bucket. "Before that, I drove cattle up from Texas, scouted for the Army a spell, tried my hand at mining." He shrugged. "Never settled anywhere for long." As they finished the work, Abigail insisted he stay for supper: venison steaks and potatoes from her garden. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful here," Zachary observed. "Yes," Abigail agreed softly. "That's why we chose it." The mention of her former life brought a pang of sadness. Zachary noticed her change in mood. "How long were you married?" 5 years, she answered after a moment. "We came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Thomas had dreams of building a cattle empire." She gestured to the half-finished buildings around them. Reality proved more difficult than dreams. "It often does," Zachary agreed. He left with Penelope Watson. Abigail found herself saying, the words spilling out unexpectedly. "The banker's daughter from Clearwater. I suppose she offered more excitement than a homesteader's wife." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "Some men don't recognize the value of what they have until it's gone." The simple statement contained no judgment, no pity, just understanding. Abigail felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Will you continue searching for the rustlers tomorrow?" she asked, changing the subject. Zachary nodded. "Need to check some passes to the north, but I could stop by on my way back if you'd like. That barn roof could use attention before the next rain." "I would appreciate that," Abigail said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The next day brought dark clouds and the distant rumble of thunder. Abigail hurried through her morning chores, eyeing the sky nervously. By midday, rain began to fall in heavy sheets, driving her inside. She found herself repeatedly glancing out the window, wondering if Zachary would brave the storm to keep his word. As the afternoon wore on, she told herself it was foolish to expect him. No sensible man would ride in such weather. She busied herself with mending clothes by the firelight, trying to ignore the disappointment settling in her chest. The sudden pounding on her door startled her so badly she pricked her finger with the needle. She rushed to open it, finding Zachary on her porch, drenched to the skin and shivering. "Mr. Blackwood," she exclaimed. "You shouldn't have come in this weather," said I would. He replied simply, water streaming from his hat. Abigail pulled him inside, insisting he sit by the fire while she fetched a blanket. "Your horse." "In your lean-to," he assured her, removing his sodden coat. She handed him the blanket and busied herself making coffee, acutely aware of him removing his wet shirt. When she turned back, he had the blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his bronzed torso barely visible beneath it. "You're a fool to ride in such conditions," she scolded, handing him a steaming cup. "Perhaps," he agreed, his blue eyes crinkling slightly, "but I keep my promises, Mrs. Montgomery." "Abigail," she said suddenly. "If you're going to risk pneumonia on my account, you might as well use my given name." A smile touched his lips. "Abigail," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Then I'm Zachary to you. The storm raged through the evening, making it impossible for Zachary to leave. Abigail insisted he take Thomas's side of the bed while she slept on a pallet by the fire, ignoring his protests. Despite the impropriety of the situation, she slept better than she had since Thomas's departure. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world. Zachary insisted on checking the roof before departing, finding and repairing several new leaks. As he prepared to leave, Abigail handed him a package of venison and biscuits for his journey. "You'll return," she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Those rustlers won't catch themselves." True to his word, Zachary returned the next day and the day after that. Each visit brought some small improvement to the homestead: a repaired fence, a strengthened door, a pile of split firewood. But more importantly for Abigail, each visit brought conversation, laughter, and a gradual easing of the loneliness that had threatened to consume her. 2 weeks after his first appearance, Zachary arrived with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Abigail asked, immediately concerned. "Found tracks not far from here," he said. "The rustlers are operating closer than I thought. I don't like leaving you alone." Fear fluttered in Abigail's chest. "I have the shotgun." Zachary shook his head. "Against a gang of 5 or 6 men, that won't be enough." He hesitated. "Abigail, I think you should consider going to town until I've dealt with this threat." "No," she said firmly. "This is my home. I won't be driven from it by fear." They argued for nearly an hour, neither willing to yield. Finally, Zachary sighed in frustration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he declared. "So I've been told," Abigail replied dryly. Zachary paced the small cabin, clearly agitated. "If you won't go to town, then I'll stay here," he decided. "At least until I've tracked down these rustlers." Abigail opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. The thought of having Zachary's protection brought more relief than she cared to admit. "You can sleep in the barn," she said finally. "It wouldn't be proper otherwise." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Naturally." That night, Abigail lay awake, acutely aware of Zachary's presence in the barn just yards from her cabin. Having a man nearby again brought a strange mixture of comfort and unease. She told herself it was merely practical. Zachary was protecting her homestead as he would anyone's. Yet she couldn't ignore how her heart quickened when he smiled at her, or how she found herself watching his hands as he worked, imagining their strength and gentleness. "Stop it," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "He's just being kind." Morning brought a new routine. Zachary would ride out after breakfast to search for signs of the rustlers, returning by midday to help with the endless chores of the homestead. Abigail found herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats, a smile ready on her lips when he appeared. On the third evening of this arrangement, they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The silence between them was comfortable, intimate in a way that made Abigail both nervous and thrilled. "May I ask you something, Zachary?" she said finally. "Anything," he replied, his voice low in the darkness. "Why are you helping me?" Truly, he was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "When I first rode up, I saw a woman standing alone against the world, refusing to bend even when abandoned." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "I admired your courage. Then I came to admire your determination, your intelligence, your strength." He paused. "And if I'm being entirely honest, your beauty as well." Heat rushed to Abigail's cheeks. "I'm hardly beautiful," she protested. "Especially now, covered in dirt and dressed in men's trousers half the time." Zachary's gaze remained steady. "I've seen women in fine dresses with jewels at their throats who weren't half as beautiful as you are with dirt on your cheek and determination in your eyes." The sincerity in his voice stole Abigail's breath. No one, not even Thomas, had ever spoken to her with such honest admiration. "I should turn in," she said abruptly, rising from her chair. "Dawn comes early." If Zachary was hurt by her sudden withdrawal, he didn't show it. "Good night, Abigail," he said softly. In the safety of her cabin, Abigail pressed her hands to her flaming cheeks. She was a married woman, abandoned, yes, but still legally bound to Thomas. Yet here she was, heart racing at another man's words, imagining things that could never be, It's just loneliness, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. But as she drifted to sleep, it was Zachary's face that filled her thoughts, not Thomas's. The next morning, Zachary departed earlier than usual, leaving Abigail alone with her confused emotions. She threw herself into work, hoping physical exhaustion would quiet her mind. By midday, when Zachary hadn't returned, she found herself glancing repeatedly toward the trail, worry gnawing at her. When afternoon faded into evening with no sign of him, Abigail's concern turned to fear. Had he encountered the rustlers? Was he injured somewhere, unable to return? Or had her awkward reaction to his words the previous night driven him away? As darkness fell, Abigail paced the cabin, debating whether to take the mule and search for him. Just as she decided to wait until morning, she heard hoofbeats approaching too many for a single rider. Heart pounding, she grabbed the shotgun and extinguished the lantern, peering through the window. 4 riders approached, their features obscured by the darkness. None of them was Zachary. Abigail positioned herself by the door, shotgun ready. When a heavy fist pounded on the wood, she called out, "Who's there?" "Open up, madam," a rough voice answered. "We're just travelers looking for shelter from the night." "There's a town 15 miles east," Abigail replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You'll find accommodations there." A different voice spoke, this one smoother, more educated. "Now, that's not very neighborly, is it? We've been riding all day and our horses need rest." "I'm sorry, but I cannot offer hospitality to strangers after dark," Abigail insisted. "Please move on." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of low, menacing laughter. "I don't think you understand the situation, madam," the educated voice continued. "We're coming in one way or another. How much damage occurs in the process is entirely up to you." Terror froze Abigail's blood. These were the rustlers Zachary had warned her about, and now she faced them alone. "I have a loaded shotgun," she warned, "and I know how to use it." "1 gun against 4 men," the voice taunted. "Poor odds, wouldn't you say, boys?" The men laughed, and Abigail heard them dismounting. She backed away from the door, aiming the shotgun at the center of it. If they broke in, she would at least take 1 or 2 with her. The first blow against the door made her jump. The second splintered the wood around the latch. Abigail steadied her aim, finger tightening on the trigger. Suddenly, from the darkness outside came the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. "Step away from that door," commanded a familiar voice, "or I'll put a bullet through the nearest man." "Zachary," Abigail gasped in relief. Outside, confusion erupted among the intruders. "Who the hell are you?" demanded the educated voice. "The man who's been tracking you across 3 counties," Zachary replied coldly. "Now back away from the door and keep your hands where I can see them." "There's 4 of us and 1 of you," challenged another voice. "True," Zachary acknowledged. "But I've got a Winchester trained on your leader's chest, and I never miss at this range. How fast do you think you can draw before I pull this trigger?" A tense silence followed. Then came the sound of footsteps retreating from the door. "Smart choice," Zachary said. "Now drop your gun belts slowly." Through the window, Abigail watched as the men complied, their faces sullen in the moonlight. One was younger than the others, barely more than a boy. The oldest wore a suit vest and spectacles, the owner of the educated voice, she presumed. "Kick them toward the house," Zachary instructed. When they had done so, he continued, "Mrs. Montgomery, if you'd be so kind as to collect those weapons while I keep these gentlemen covered." Abigail hesitated only briefly before unbarring the door and stepping onto the porch, shotgun still ready. She gathered the discarded gun belts, never taking her eyes off the men. "What now, lawman?" asked the well-dressed rustler. "You can't very well escort 4 of us to jail alone." "I'm not a lawman," Zachary corrected. "Just a man who doesn't appreciate thieves threatening innocent women." He reached into his pocket with his free hand and withdrew a length of rope. "Mrs. Montgomery, if you would tie their hands, start with the gentleman in the vest." For the next half hour, Abigail followed Zachary's instructions, binding the men's hands and securing them to her porch railing. When all 4 were restrained, Zachary finally lowered his rifle. "I'll ride for the sheriff at first light," he told the captives. "Until then, you'll spend the night contemplating your poor life choices." The young rustler began to protest about sleeping outdoors, but a glare from Zachary silenced him. Inside the cabin, Abigail's hands shook as reaction set in. "I thought you weren't coming back," she admitted. Zachary placed his rifle on the table and turned to her, his face grim. "I found their camp earlier today. Been watching them since noon, trying to determine their next move. When they headed this way at sunset, I circled around to intercept them." His expression softened. "I'm sorry I frightened you. You saved my life," Abigail said simply. He shook his head. "You'd have accounted for at least one of them with that shotgun, maybe two. And then the others would have killed me," she finished bluntly. Zachary didn't contradict her. Instead, he moved closer, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" The genuine concern in his voice broke something inside Abigail. The fear and tension of the past hours overwhelmed her, and to her mortification, tears spilled down her cheeks. Without hesitation, Zachary closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her. Abigail stiffened momentarily, then melted against him, her face pressed against his chest as silent sobs shook her body. His hand stroked her hair gently, his voice murmuring soothing words she couldn't quite distinguish. When her tears finally subsided, Abigail became acutely aware of their position, of his strength surrounding her, of his heartbeat beneath her ear, of the clean male scent of him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling back slightly. "I don't usually." "Don't apologize," he interrupted softly. "Not for being human." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Zachary's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in them that made Abigail's heart race. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with an intensity that shocked her. Instead, he stepped back, releasing her gently. "You should rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll keep watch on our guests." Disappointment and relief warred within her. "You need rest too," she protested. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "Go on." Reluctantly, Abigail retreated to her bed, though she doubted sleep would come easily with 4 criminals on her porch and Zachary Blackwood keeping vigil just outside her door. True to his word, Zachary rode for the sheriff at dawn, leaving Abigail with strict instructions to keep the cabin door barred and the shotgun ready. The rustlers, subdued after a night tied to the porch railing, watched him go with sullen expressions. "He'll be back," Abigail warned them when one tested his bonds, "and he won't be as merciful if you cause trouble." The well-dressed leader studied her with calculating eyes. "That your husband, madam?" "That's none of your concern," she replied coldly. A smirk crossed his face. "Not your husband, then? Interesting. Does he know you're a married woman?" Abigail's cheeks flushed with anger. "My personal affairs are not open for discussion, especially with a thief." "Simon Westerly," he corrected smoothly. "Harvard educated, I come from a good Boston family, Mrs. Montgomery," she supplied reluctantly. "Mrs. Montgomery," he repeated, smiling. "A pleasure, despite the circumstances. Tell me, what brings a clearly educated woman like yourself to this wilderness alone?" Despite her better judgment, Abigail found herself drawn into conversation with Simon Westerly. Unlike his rough companions, he spoke with cultured precision about literature, music, and art subjects Abigail had loved in her previous life. For a brief time, she almost forgot he was a criminal who had tried to break into her home. "How does a Harvard man become a rustler?" she asked eventually. Simon shrugged as best he could with his hands bound. "Bad investments, gambling debts, the usual tale of fallen privilege." He glanced at his companions. These men were easy to recruit, desperate, uneducated, willing to follow anyone who promised quick money. "And now you'll all hang," Abigail observed. "Perhaps," Simon conceded. "Or perhaps your friend will never return. The trail to town is dangerous after all." Indians, wild animals, accidents. A chill ran through Abigail at his implication. "Zachary can take care of himself." "I'm sure," Simon agreed too readily. "Still, if something were to happen, you might find yourself in need of protection again. I could provide that, Mrs. Montgomery. Just untie me, and I'll ensure no harm comes to you." Abigail's momentary sympathy vanished. "I'd sooner trust a rattlesnake, Mr. Westerly." His charming facade slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You'll regret that choice when your cowboy doesn't return." Abigail retreated to the cabin, unsettled by the exchange. Simon's words had planted a seed of worry. What if something did happen to Zachary on the journey to town? The sheriff's office was a full day's ride away. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Abigail kept the rustlers fed and watered, always maintaining a safe distance and keeping the shotgun visible. As evening approached with no sign of Zachary, her anxiety grew. Had Simon's veiled threat been more than mere manipulation? Night fell, and Abigail barricaded herself inside, listening to the rustlers' increasingly loud complaints. Sleep was impossible as her mind conjured images of Zachary injured or worse. By dawn, she was exhausted and frantic with worry. When hoofbeats finally approached around mid-morning, Abigail rushed to the window, nearly sobbing with relief at the sight of Zachary riding toward the cabin. He wasn't alone. The sheriff and 2 deputies followed close behind. Abigail flung open the door and hurried down the steps, barely restraining herself from throwing her arms around Zachary as he dismounted. "You're back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. His eyes softened as they met hers. "I promised I would be." The sheriff, a grizzled man named Harrison, wasted no time securing the rustlers. As he examined Simon Westerly's face, recognition dawned. "Well, I'll be damned," he exclaimed. "Simon Westerly, there's a reward for you in 3 territories." Simon's smooth confidence faltered. "A case of mistaken identity, I assure you." Sheriff Harrison laughed humorlessly. "Tell it to the judge." He turned to Zachary. "You've done good work, Blackwood. The association will be pleased." As the deputies prepared to depart with their prisoners, the sheriff approached Abigail. "Mrs. Montgomery, isn't it? Your husband recently passed through Clearwater with a young woman." Abigail stiffened. "Yes." Harrison looked uncomfortable. "Madam, I feel you should know he's been telling folks the ranch was lost in a fire, that you didn't make it." The words hit Abigail like a physical blow. Thomas hadn't just abandoned her, he'd erased her, killed her in a fictional tragedy to free himself completely. "I see," she managed to say. "Thank you for telling me." The sheriff nodded awkwardly, then turned to Zachary. "We'll be on our way. The reward money will be processed once they're convicted. Should take about a month." After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, silence settled over the homestead. Abigail stood motionless, processing the sheriff's revelation. "Abigail," Zachary's voice was gentle, "are you all right?" She laughed bitterly. "My husband has apparently murdered me. I'm not certain all right applies." He approached cautiously. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, straightening her shoulders. "It changes nothing, really. He was already gone." Zachary studied her face. "What will you do now?" It was the question Abigail had been avoiding for weeks. With the rustlers captured, Zachary would have no reason to stay. He would collect his reward and move on to the next assignment, leaving her alone again. "Continue as I have been," she said with forced confidence. "The garden is doing well. The cow provides milk. I can hunt now. Thanks to your lessons, I'll manage." Zachary was silent for a long moment. "You could sell the ranch," he suggested quietly. "Start fresh somewhere else." "And go where?" Abigail challenged. "Do what? Women alone have few options, Zachary." "You wouldn't have to be alone," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Abigail's heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" Zachary stepped closer, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I'm saying that in these past weeks I've come to care for you, Abigail. More than I should, perhaps, given your situation, but I can't ride away and leave you here alone, wondering if you're safe, if you're happy." He took a deep breath. "Come with me. We could build something together." Abigail stared at him, hope and fear battling within her. "I'm still married, Zachary, legally at least. Your husband has declared you dead," he pointed out. "In time, you could file for divorce on grounds of abandonment, or," he hesitated, "or we could simply go somewhere new where no one knows your past." The offer was so tempting that Abigail found herself swaying toward him before catching herself. "I can't just leave," she protested. "This land, this home, it's all I have." "No," Zachary said softly. "It's not all you have, not anymore." He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and cupped her cheek in his calloused palm. Abigail closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. "I need time," she whispered. "To think, to decide." Zachary nodded, his expression understanding as he lowered his hand. "I'll be here as long as you need me." In the days that followed, Abigail wrestled with her decision. Zachary continued to help around the homestead, but he maintained a respectful distance, never pressing her for an answer. Each night, he retreated to the barn to sleep, leaving Abigail alone with her thoughts and increasingly restless dreams. A week after the rustlers' capture, Abigail rode to Clearwater for supplies, her first trip to town since Thomas's departure. She felt the curious stares of the townsfolk as she made her purchases, heard the whispers behind her back. "Isn't that Thomas Montgomery's widow? I thought she died in that fire he mentioned. Who's that man staying at her place, the one who brought in the Westerly gang?" Abigail held her head high, ignoring the gossip. In the general store, she encountered Penelope Watson's father, who blanched at the sight of her. "Mrs. Montgomery," he stammered. "We had heard, that is, Thomas said, that I perished in a tragic fire," Abigail finished coolly. "I'm afraid the reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Mr. Watson." The banker tugged at his collar nervously. "Yes, well, most unfortunate misunderstanding." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "You should know that Thomas and my Penelope have continued east, St. Louis, I believe. They were married last month." The news should have hurt, but Abigail felt only a distant sense of closure. Thomas had truly moved on, had been willing to commit bigamy to do so. Any lingering obligation she felt toward their marriage vows seemed suddenly absurd. "I wish them every happiness," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a long ride ahead." As she rode back to the ranch, Abigail's thoughts turned to Zachary, to his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. For weeks, she had fought her growing feelings, clinging to the technicality of a marriage that existed only on paper. But Thomas had moved on without a backward glance. Why shouldn't she do the same? The sun was setting when Abigail reached the homestead. She found Zachary by the corral, mending a broken section of fence. He straightened as she approached, concern in his eyes. "How was town?" he asked, setting down his tools. "Enlightening," Abigail replied. "Thomas has married Penelope Watson. They've gone to St. Louis." Zachary was silent for a moment, studying her face. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, and realized it was true. "I am." She took a deep breath. "Zachary, I've made my decision." His expression remained carefully neutral, though his knuckles whitened where he gripped the fence post. And Abigail stepped closer, her heart thundering in her chest. "I want to stay here," she said softly. "This land is part of me now. I've fought for it, bled for it. I can't abandon it." Disappointment flickered across his face before he masked it. "I understand," he said, his voice even. "You've built something here. It's not easy to walk away from that." "No," Abigail agreed. "It isn't." She reached out, taking his rough hand in hers. "Which is why I'm asking you to stay here with me." Zachary went perfectly still, his eyes searching hers. "Abigail, I know it's not what you planned," she rushed on. "You're used to traveling, to freedom. I'm asking you to settle in one place, to build a life here. It's a lot to ask, and if you can't," her words were cut off as Zachary pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that stole her breath and scattered her thoughts. His arms encircled her waist, lifting her slightly as he deepened the kiss, months of restrained longing pouring out in a moment of passionate connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I'd already decided to stay," he confessed. "I was just trying to find the courage to tell you. I've never wanted roots before, Abigail, never wanted to belong somewhere to someone, until you." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and effervescent. "Then stay," she whispered against his lips. "Stay and build this ranch with me. Stay and build a life with me." His answer was another kiss, this one gentle and full of promise. That night, for the first time, Zachary didn't sleep in the barn. As husband in all but name, he claimed his place beside Abigail, their bodies finding a harmony as natural as their partnership had become. In the darkness, they whispered plans for the future, expanding the herd, finishing the barn, perhaps adding rooms to the cabin for the children they both hoped would come. As summer turned to fall, the homestead transformed under their combined efforts. Zachary's reward money from capturing the Westerly gang allowed them to purchase a small herd of cattle and hire 2 hands to help with the heavier work. The barn was completed before the first snow, and the cabin gained a new bedroom and a proper kitchen. Word reached them in November that Thomas Montgomery had died of typhoid in St. Louis, leaving Penelope a widow after barely 4 months of marriage. Abigail felt a moment of sadness for the man she had once loved, but no regret for the path she had chosen. With Thomas's death, the legal impediment to their union was removed. On a crisp December morning, Abigail and Zachary rode to Clearwater and were married by the same judge who had sentenced Simon Westerly to 20 years in territorial prison. Sheriff Harrison stood as witness, his gruff exterior softening as he wished them happiness. "Never seen two people better matched," he told Zachary as they left the courthouse. "You riding in that day was the best thing that could have happened to either of you." As they journeyed home through the winter landscape, snow beginning to dust their shoulders, Zachary reached across to take Abigail's hand. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, his smile warming her more effectively than any fire. Abigail squeezed his hand, marveling at how completely her life had changed in the span of a few months, how abandonment had led to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Who would have thought that watching my husband ride away would lead me here?" Zachary's expression grew serious. "His loss, my gain." He brought her gloved hand to his lips. "I'll never leave you, Abigail. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my days." As they crested the hill overlooking their ranch, their home, Abigail felt a sense of rightness settle in her soul. The half-finished dreams of her first marriage had given way to something stronger, truer, built on mutual respect and genuine love. "Race you home." Zachary challenged, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Abigail laughed, the sound carrying across the snow-covered prairie. "You'll lose, Cowboy," she warned, urging her horse forward. Their laughter mingled in the clear winter air as they galloped toward the future they would build together, day by day, side by side, never to be parted again. By the spring of 1877, the Blackwood Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory for its quality stock and fair dealings. Zachary's experience with cattle had proven invaluable, and Abigail's careful management of their finances ensured steady growth. The nightmare of her abandonment had faded like morning mist under the warm sun of their shared life. One evening in late April, as they sat on the expanded porch watching the sunset, Abigail rested her head on Zachary's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "What is it?" he asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "I was just thinking about last spring," she admitted. How different everything was. Zachary's expression darkened briefly. "I sometimes wish I could meet your former husband, just to thank him for being fool enough to leave you." Abigail chuckled. "I prefer to think of it as the universe conspiring to bring you to my door." She placed her hand over his. "I have something to tell you." His eyebrows rose. "Good news or bad, the very best," she whispered, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat stomach. "We'll need that new bedroom sooner than we planned." Zachary stared at her for a moment, uncomprehending, then his eyes widened. "You're with child," he breathed. Abigail nodded, tears of joy springing to her eyes at the look of wonder spreading across his face. "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." With a whoop of joy, Zachary lifted her from the chair and spun her around, his laughter mingling with hers in the evening air. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby." "The first of many, I hope," Abigail said, smiling up at him. Zachary dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her midriff. "Hello in there," he murmured. "I'm your father, and I promise to protect you and love you every day of your life." Abigail stroked his dark hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. From the depths of despair, she had found her way to this perfect happiness not despite her abandonment, but because of it. As twilight deepened around them, husband and wife remained on the porch, whispering dreams for their child's future, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges came, they would face them together, the woman who had refused to be defeated and the cowboy who had come back every day for her.